on this
The bottom.
There you go.
There we go. So I will do an official welcome to our guest, Bryan Bowen. And he is an architect with Caddis Collaborative in Boulder. And he has done work on co-housing developments, which I'm sure we're going to hear about. And he's done a lot of other really interesting work, which I think we might hear a little bit about. But also of interest to our co-housing group is that you have raised your children in co-housing. And we have some questions about that, like about attracting families to co-housing. That's a big concern for us right now. So there might be some more people joining us. We will be taping this and putting this on our website so people can see it again, or people who couldn't make it can see it. And like I said, we're gonna let Bryan give us a little overview of some of his co-housing work first, and talk for a bit about some of these other things, and then we'll open it up for questions. Does that sound okay, Bryan?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll try to go through the presentation I put together relatively quickly, so we can always zoom back to it. So.
Well,
okay, so we need to share screens with you, right?
Yeah, I want to share a screen because I got some slides and stuff to show you guys. So.
Okay. We were figuring 30 to 45 minutes for you, Bryan, so don't rush.
Okay, cool. That is rushing for me, man. I could just talk forever. Yeah.
Well, you can go longer if you want. This call is scheduled from 7 until 8:30. So.
Okay, cool. No, I think you guys will get sick of hearing me like talk without engaging with you for sure. So okay, I'll go ahead and share that screen, and you guys can see what we're doing here. Is that showing up for everybody?
I can see it.
Great. Okay, cool. And feel free to interrupt anytime. This is for you guys. So it's your time. So you guys asked me to talk about a few things. Like one is just like life in co-housing and my experience raising kids in co-housing, and another one was affordability. Another one was sort of like circling through some of our past work, just to show you guys a little bit of a flavor of some of the stuff we've done. There's growing library of good information out there on co-housing, and I do have like a kind of a big slide library I'd be happy to share with you guys too, so you can like weed through that and grab stuff for your own marketing purposes or uses, whatever. That's something I'm happy to do. So let's see. So just my office is Caddis Collaborative, and there's right now 9 of us, but we're about to be 10, maybe 11 or 12, depending on how hiring goes in the next couple of weeks. We try pretty hard to be, as diverse as we can and as talented as we can. The folks that we've got here all have a lot of experience, and a lot of them have a lot of experience with co-housing in particular. There's some of the stuff in the beginning that's a little bit like more about us, and you don't really need to hear a whole lot about us, but we say we do a good job. This is a slide that tries to reinforce that. My background as it relates to co-housing is I first heard about co-housing in, I guess it would have been 94 maybe. And my good friend Sally Ann came to my desk at college and said, architecture studio, and like slapped this book in front of me and said, "Oh my God, Bryan, that thing that we've been talking about exists already. It's called co-housing." And we were like, "Oh my God." So we poured through Chuck and Katie's book, and we've also been taking studio courses from David Lewis, who is one of the first urban designers in the world, South African guy who helped fight segregation and apartheid, and came to the US and was a big part of the civil rights movement. Urban designer, created Urban Design Associates, great guy. So we had like a lot of great influences. Stephanie Liedowitz, who's also become a co-housing architect, was a professor of mine who spoke about the psychology of habitation. How does space impact your mind and mental health? Very relevant to co-housing. So raising kids in co-housing, I joined Wild Sage after being the architect for a few years, and after the workshop process was done. And so we've been in there for about 16 years, and 2 of these kids are my kids back here. And they sort of don't know any different. They think that this is what the world's like, that you could just know the neighbors, all the names of everybody, and you could share meals, and you could like walk out your door and have fast friendships with everybody around you. And one of my favorite like we have all these little examples of where that has sort of shown up. And we went to this like nameless, faceless subdivision down in Florida, where my wife's family has a house and sort of extended family. And we drove in this like gray stucco subdivision of, boringness, and pulled in there. And he was maybe 2.5 or 3 at the time. And he said, "I'm going to go outside, Daddy." And I was like, "Okay." And he like turned and he ran outside and he made this big loop through the big lawn. And he was like looking around, like running, looking around. And he came back to the house. He goes, "Daddy, where's all the friends?" And I was just like, oh, this is a child who thinks that like when you go outside, that's where your friends are. Like that's where people should be. And, when we talked about like, oh, this is a cool place, on some vacation, let's move here. They would say, oh yeah. And then the Hoskins can move over there, and these guys can move over there, and these guys can move over there. Their sense of self and family is really quite broad. So a lot of what I talk about is from the sense of experience. And, most of us are coming from places that are like, we're having a reaction to these places and saying like, oh, instead of doing that, let's do something different. And, we just tell people like the best way to, predict the future is to make it happen for yourself. So, and, the next couple slides here are really boilerplate co-housing kind of information. So for those of you who are new to the idea, this information comes from the CoHousing website, cohousing.org, and there's great information on this, but the key identifying characteristics are, having these relationships with your neighbors, balancing privacy and community, involvement with the process, participating in the design and development process and the operating process. This is something we do for ourselves together, and sharing values with people, which also means like being enlightened by each other, by our differences, not just like you want everybody to get in the same boat and go the same way. And there's tons of social benefits to it. And really, like, you could say all the things about like the shoulds and whys and stuff about why people should be doing co-housing, but in reality, it's just because it's super pleasant and people are like craving the good life. That's what they're trying to get out of this. And that usually involves being able to have a supportive matrix of relationships around you all the time. And those are variable. You're not going to love everybody the same or get along with everybody the same. You're going to have strife with certain people. You're going to mess up and then, have an opportunity to try to recover from that mistake that you made in community. So in terms of like raising kids there, gosh, I have so many stories. But a lot of it is really the experience of doing it as a dad. I have a wife and 2 kids. They're 14 and 16 now, so they've been in co-housing their whole lives, like I said. And so their day-to-day observed experience is amazing. They have access to all kinds of other kids. We live in a close-knit new urbanist neighborhood. So there's, outside of the boundaries of just Wild Sage, there's a great matrix of other things that are similar. And we go to the neighborhood schools so that we can be a part of that and, know the teachers, and the kids will know people from our neighborhood. The kids all think of each other sort of as siblings, in the good and bad ways. Like some people are like, I don't like that kid, he's always bugging me or whatever. But they have a long sense of the game of relationships. Like Americans are trained to decide, I don't like her anymore, I'm not going to talk to her, I'm done with her, and we write off our relationships very quickly, and we treat each other as very disposable. And so even somebody who you don't really have a lot in common with, or maybe you don't even think much of, who's part of your community, is a part of your life in this sort of like tangential way. And then you have the people who you have really deep connections with, and the people who you keep bees with, or the people who you work in the wood shop with, or the people who you do happy hour with, or everyone's got their own things. The people you cycle with, or do nature hikes with, or go birding with. You find those things in each other. And one thing I hear from a lot of co-housing groups as they are growing is like, I was always curious about such and such a thing, and then I found out this person was really into it, so I was able to learn how to do it from them. So they really expand their horizons together as they grow. And ideally that jumps across different puddles into different, diversity boundaries. And, you learn a lot about yourself and other people. And I feel lucky at Wild Sage, we have and I'll talk about this a little bit more under affordability, but we have a mixed income community. So 4 of the homes were Habitat homes, 10 of the homes are a higher level of income restriction, deed restriction. And then the rest of the homes, the other 60% are market rate. And so you have a broad array of economic backgrounds in that mix. And that creates a lot of like, because I don't think I mean, I certainly don't. I don't think anybody in my community likes someone more or less because they're like in an affordable unit or a market rate unit. But the person that you like who's in a market rate unit versus the person you like who's in the affordable unit, maybe they're going through different things financially, and like things for them feel different when the HOA needs to do a special assessment, and they're faced with something that maybe $500 to one household is no big deal, and to another household it's a real crisis. So many Americans are living just like one small emergency away from a real serious crisis financially. So and then watching what happens over at Silver Sage, all the 16 units over there, folks, mostly it's a seniors community, how they relate to each other and share meals and support each other. And since they're all done having kids and they've all lived a lot longer than the rest of us over at Wild Sage, they have a lot more to share. And they're super intellectually curious. So they tend to really get into things in a way that I think those of us with like young kids, we just don't have time for. We're just trying to get dinner on the table and get kids to bed and go to work and do all the stuff. Whereas like, the folks at Silver Sage are, they're retired and they're like intellectually trying to get after it and learn new things. So that's pretty exciting. Okay, I'll weave in some other stories about co-housing as we go along here. I'll talk a little bit about affordability strategies. This is a really important topic, and it's one that's like, it's a topic of a lot of talks and a lot of writing and a lot of investigation right now. And no one's figured it out really. For Wild Sage and Silver Sage, we exist in a city environment where there is a density bonus for going to a higher level of affordability. We have inclusionary housing. So at the very minimum, you have to do 20% of your homes as affordable, or pay cash in lieu into a program that creates more affordable homes. We went to 40%, and we got a density bonus of 2x. So Wild Sage and Silver Sage were both developed at 20 dwelling units per acre. So some of the funding strategies that help support affordability are things like that. Entitlement bonuses, where you get additional density for providing units, or a city may have a grant system or a fee reduction system that will reduce fees for certain affordability goals being met. Usually there's like a quid pro quo to these things where they'll give you something if you commit to something. And, in the city of Boulder, that is, really what they're looking for is permanently affordable units. They're deed restricted. They're never going to not be affordable again. In fact, they become increasingly affordable every year as the market floats up and away from them. So a unit that might have been sold at 75% of the comparable value of a market rate home, well, now that's 50%. In 10 years, it's going to be 25%. So this really interesting magnification of that is happening over time. There'll probably be some weird unforeseen consequences to that, but and then or maybe getting a faster path through the approvals process. So the way to find out about those things is to talk to your state, county, city, and your building department, and see if your planning departments, and see if you can figure out what they can do for you. Then there's like the realm of external subsidies, and those are basically, if you look at it from a governmental perspective, you get maybe federal, state, city, county. Does anybody have any money they can give you to do a thing? And that's basically the transaction you're looking for. Like, who out there can help us achieve your goals? And I mean like the city's goals. Like, you got to go to the city and say, like, I understand that you have affordability goals. What are they? And how can our project help you accommodate those goals or complete those goals? Because there's like a billion bureaucrats in the world who are unable to make headway on these well-meant goals that the politicians and city councils and planning commissions and their leadership say we should be doing, because there's just no mechanism. So if you can become their ally, that can be a real powerful position. Sometimes that's in the form of some of the entitlement stuff. Other times it's in the form of grants. This is all like ground level footwork. You got to get out there and like pound the pavement to find out all these things. So external subsidies, basically all they're trying to do is give you money or a reduction in cost, and then that allows you to reduce the cost of certain units. So it's a really pretty straightforward economic this for that model in your development spreadsheet. Then there's internal subsidies, which are pretty interesting. I have not seen a co-housing group do it as a whole, because if your LLC that's developing it says, okay, we want to charge 4 units less money for the same unit as we're selling at market rates over here, well, that money's got to come from somewhere. So that revenue that creates that discount means it comes from everybody else's sale prices. And usually what that does is somebody somewhere in that step model is like, they drop out. So like, okay, maybe you bring in 4 households, but you lose 4 here in the middle income because their middle income unit went too expensive. Or maybe the banks don't like it and they feel like it doesn't appraise properly. So there's some risks to that I haven't seen people overcome. I have seen groups come together as a small group of neighbors and say, you know what, like I've got enough money. I've been, I sold my big house that I raised my kids in for, $1.2 million, and I'm going to buy a $600,000 unit here. So I've got money to spare. I can buy down the price of somebody else's unit. And I've seen people do that by saying like, okay, well, and it's hard to figure out who and how, those are all really tricky things. But sometimes what happens is over time, you might have somebody in the group who's like, yeah, I really, I've done a lot for this group and I'm really, I've got great relationships here, but I can't afford to move in. So I'm going to quit. And maybe a couple of people say, you know what, don't quit. Tell you what, I'll give you a $50,000 loan to buy down the price of your unit. And then you just pay me back when you sell that unit. And I get the same percent increase that the market gives you on your sale price. So it's patient capital basically, and it's a person to person or small group, to person kind of a loan. And to that end, you can negotiate whatever you want. I mean, you could just give each other money, which is great. And then another source is really partnerships, like leveraging the ability, the capacity of other existing institutions to do cool things. Habitat has access to 0% loans. They have access to cheaper building materials. They have access to labor pool, blitz builds. I mean, they could do all kinds of cool things. So we brought Habitat in on our project. We did a blitz build to build 4 Habitat units inside a multifamily building, which was tricky and very fun and cool. Local housing authorities, sometimes they are, everybody at this point's heard of co-housing in that housing world. So sometimes they'll say like, oh yeah, we're really interested in the idea of doing co-housing, but we don't know how to do it. And if you go to them and say like, well, we really want to be a part of your next project. We want you to, carve off a piece of your next parcel that is, 0.8 of an acre. We're going to do 25 units and we will build out a mixed income piece of it as for sale product, which is hard for them to do right now. And the other part, you can right size your low income housing tax credits, your LIHTC project to be 75 units. Because LIHTC really loves like sort of 60 to 80 unit projects. So sometimes you can find somebody's got an opportunity that they need to carve up into a little bit smaller pieces. And if they can, if you find out that they've been having a hard time creating for sale product, because usually like, the housing money that's available now really drives towards rentals. And oftentimes there's like city council people or neighborhood groups who are like, how come you're only doing rentals? You should be doing for sale housing product. And it's hard to make that work. So you might be able to throw them a life preserver on that. Also going to the developers and just saying like, hey, I represent a group of 28 pre-approved buyers. We would like to do a 36 unit project. And what properties do you guys have that are in the design process? We're doing this with Denver Co-housing right now. Instead of having them march around and try to find land to develop themselves, I said, just hit up all the developers. There's tons of development going on. It's super competitive. It's actually really brutal out there right now. And if you can go to them and say, like, you've got a bunch of buyers and you can take the speculation out of their system, that's cool. So we're helping them do that right now. So we're providing consulting services on how to make it really good co-housing without disrupting the architect developer team who's existing on that project. We're not trying to mess up their model. So those are some of the main funding strategies. Then there's like the stuff that you have baked into your pro forma. Understanding that sharing walls saves money, saves energy too. Stacking units saves money and energy. Having a small number of unit types. If you have like 17 unit types, then you're doing this sort of crazy custom home project, and you need to not do that. You need to recognize that like your project really wants to be a production housing project, and use that to your advantage. Make that be great. It can be cute little bungalows. It can be whatever you want, but recognize that like there's a set of physical laws at play that really drive things. And if you can be savvy about that and know how they impact you, you're going to be in much better shape. Keeping your architecture simple, not jiggy joggy the buildings a whole bunch, not making them super exorbitant. Other basic things like keeping the affordable units to the inside so you can charge a premium for end units. You're trying to generate revenue from those end units having bigger windows to pay down the price of those internal units, right? That's how you're creating affordability passively inside your project. Super simple buildings. I mean, some of the best photos of neighborhoods I've seen are really simple buildings with a great landscape in between the buildings. As co-housing architects, you mostly just want to get out of the way and let the space between the buildings really sing and create the circulation patterns and the choreography and the opportunities for perching and outdoor areas together that make it really wonderful. And then, accessibility also is tied to this. Like, so if you start stacking units and you say, well, we got to have everything be accessible, elevators are expensive, you're better off saying like, well, we want to be as accessible as we can be, knowing that we need to create a project that works through a financial model. And there's also different types of housing that can be stuck into a co-housing project. Some groups have like employed rentals. So sometimes like, one homeowner will buy 2 units and rent the second one out. Some groups have prohibited that because they think there's a power dynamic there that's tricky. And I guess there could be, depending on the person's behavior. The trick is like not having it be owned by the community, because then again, like the community's got to buy a whole extra unit and everybody's prices go up to do that. So then it basically makes everybody less affordable throughout the whole mix. So anything that you do that taxes the whole community tends to be a real problem in terms of financing it. I mean, that's what Wild Sage did. We did, because that's the way our rules are built here. We, in the market rate units paid more and the affordable units paid less. But there was a metric for figuring that out. Like there's income qualifications, stuff like that. So we didn't have to internally decide like, oh, well, you get it and then you don't. Who's deserving? And you got to ask yourself too. Like, so is the writer who has like 2 PhDs, who's got this amazing career, but currently only works 10 hours a week and has this really sort of like quiet, sweet lifestyle, in the same financial boat as a working mom who's making the same $10,000 a year, busting her butt and raising 3 kids. It's hard to just talk about who deserves what in some of these contexts when you get into real people. And then house sharing, I think there's a whole co-householding movement out there and co-living. And I've seen most of our communities recently kind of rabbit hole on this, where they think like, oh my gosh, we got to design a bunch of weird units to try to make that work. Just make them the same units as the for sale units. People they move into a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom unit and they share it. They don't need to make a special unit type for sharing as different entries or different, it's just kind of complicated. And plus most places have barriers for doing things like 2 kitchens in 1 unit or stuff like that. The city starts to say, well, that's 2 units actually. So, and we've done a lot of co-ops. I love the idea of embedding a co-op in co-housing community. We've designed a couple of those. Hasn't really come about yet, but we're going to get it there. And, you guys live in a place where there are co-ops, real successful history of cooperative housing there. In Boulder, we've got some. We've partnered with Boulder Housing Coalition to do a bunch of co-ops here. And we have an intention of getting them to be our partner on another embed in a community. And that is typically a different building type and a different owner. You really want like somebody like Boulder Housing Coalition to own it. And then they have their operating rules and they have got their insurance and they've got their rental agreements, and they've got their communication trainings and all the stuff that goes along with being a really successful co-op. And whether it's like built into the common house and the kitchen that they have there is the common kitchen, or whether it's a separate house. I like the idea of it being sort of like living in the common house, but that's what we design anyways. Lot to talk about there, but that's a partnership question. Like, you need somebody who's going to help you with that, unless the community wants to pay a whole bunch extra to build a 15-bedroom house, which you can't afford anyways, because then you got to sell your 2-bedroom flats for 40% more than the bank would ever give you a loan for. So you really got to watch that, how it looks to other people piece. A lot of different observers. So on past projects, this was kind of fun to put this together because I haven't done this for a while, and it's cool to see our like list of completed projects growing, and a lot of opportunity out there for us co-housing wise. Also, there's a lot of like real sad projects on the side of the road that didn't make it. You know, like one that my parents were involved with in Placitas, New Mexico, where I grew up, and we weren't able to get it through the planning commission. So that project had a lot of strength and financially worked, and everybody was in on it, but we got shot down by some honestly crooked local politicians. And then other projects, they find that perhaps a key person falls into trouble. Like, we were doing one up in Homer, Alaska, and like the sort of main uniting burning soul character passed away partway through the design process, and everyone was so saddened and shell-shocked by that they just couldn't ever move ahead. And one couple had bought the land just because they had enough money to, and they said, you know what, we'll just hang on to it. If it comes back, it comes back. If it doesn't, that's cool. And it never really came back. So, co-housing projects are fragile. They're not like a done deal. It takes all you guys working together to make it happen. And good guidance really helps. I like working with Katie McCammon and CoHousing Solutions. They've been a real fantastic partner for us. And, we try really hard to be like Sherpas, keeping you guys out of the crevasses on your Everest summit. Because there's just one crevasse after another out there. I swear to God, it's unbelievable. So we've got a bunch of projects that we've gotten built now, and Wild Sage and Silver Sage here are side by side in Holiday Neighborhood. Lyons Valley Village, we did the site planning for. Katie did the common house, and a couple other friends of ours that we recommended did the housing. Germantown Commons is in Nashville. That was done a few years ago, and it's been a fantastic project. And a few of these are on the boards right now. So let's walk you through them real quickly. Wild Sage is 34 homes on 1.48 acres, and it's in the Holiday Neighborhood, and it's all developed to be very community focused and new urbanist at the same time. And you can see this bottom right image down here. Every home has a south facing aspect, winter solar, passive solar access. There's a lot of solar on the roofs. It was a really energy efficient project. But one of the things that really works the best is that if you look at that image down here, each one of these alleys between the units opens up onto the green. So kind of no matter where you're coming or going from, like, is there something happening on the green or not? Like, oh, I can hear like kids are playing, or my friends are out there, or oh, happy hour's going on, or something's happening in the common house. That's cool. But we also still have some places like a little quiet hot tub deck that you can go up to and people won't know you're there. And I can go on and on about life in this community, but so that's about the high level view of it. And right across the street is Silver Sage Village, and you can see Wild Sage sort of back here in the background. When we designed Silver Sage, we lined up the common house of Silver Sage with the gap in the buildings at Wild Sage, so you could see from one common house to the other. There's a visual connection between the two. That's a cool architect's formal idea. I'm not sure it makes much of a difference, because like the level of contact between communities is not as much as we thought it would be. It turns out all the folks that we know over at Silver Sage, they've moved into a seniors co-housing community to be away from kids. So they're not gonna like come across the street to hang out with kids. And conversely, they don't want us to bring our kids over there to their common outdoor spaces or their common meals. They're noisy and they run around and they do stuff, they touch things. So there's not any difficulty between the communities, but there's not as much connection as, but I've got some really good friends over there. So we do, Jim Leach and Brownie live over there, and some other friends. So, and that's also a really energy efficient project. Everything faces south. It's organized around a common green. The common house is a central part down here. You've got basically an exterior loaded walkway system that ties all of the second story units to an elevator, creating accessibility for everybody up there. And all of the units are fully accessible in terms of main floor master living, but some of them have lofts or basements. And we decided that was a good mix because we could afford, it made money for the project to add basements or add lofts. You could have a second bedroom up there until you had mobility problems. You could sleep up there, down there in the basement, and you could always have roommates or caretakers in those spaces. So there's a lot of things about that project that are really successful, I think, and it's living really well, I think. They got lucky in terms of site planning because they have this alley running behind the property. So we were able to load that alley with all the garages and car and surface parking. And so there's no parking lots on site at all. It's a real efficient use of land. And there's a lot of things like, raised planters, and I'll go into that a little bit more. Like this is the common green here in the middle, and like this left blue building on the community side is bike shed. So it's like a bike barn, lots of bikes, bike shop, activity hub. The other side is parking. The middle one is the wood shop, and you can see the garage doors open there in that image. They open that up and they're in and out of there, and all kinds of cool things are happening all the time. The back side of that's the trash enclosure facing the alley. The closer ones behind the little tree is a potting shed. And I designed this like cool little potting shed with like removable slatted stuff and all that kind of thing. And they built the thing. I couldn't believe it. It was totally great. Usually they look at that kind of drawing and they go, I'm not building that. That costs too much money, but they followed through on it. That's when Jim Leach is your developer, they follow through on the cool things. So there's a lot of from site planning perspective, we ringed the common green with lots of activities and homes, entries to homes, entries to the common house, common patio, raised beds, all the things I mentioned before. Real successful project. Lyons Valley Village is one that we collaborated, again, like mentioned, with Katie and Wolf Lyon Architects back at the time. We did all the site planning and pro forma work for that one. And it's 18 units on 1.5 acres. So it's half as many homes almost on about the same amount of land as Wild Sage. So you can see that turns into duplexes as opposed to townhomes and flats. So you can see there's like a real difference in the density and how it gets applied in terms of housing typologies in that. And also like architecturally, it's like a little more cottagey. Germantown Commons is in a historic neighborhood in Nashville. And that one was a entitlement kind of challenge. They really wanted us to, on the one hand, be historic cottages, but on the other hand, like right across the street, they were doing 5-story brand new urban redevelopment. So we were sort of this like weird transitional thing, and I had to work really closely with them to get this thing approved and to make it be what works for the community. The site is beautiful, like this big old pair of cottonwood trees right in front of the common house. We kept that as stormwater detention to make sure those trees stayed watered and fed and happy, stayed out of their root zone, built the common house with a big sort of lantern effect opening back to the commons, and then up these common alleys where there's only one common alley. So all the units open up onto that one common green. It's a series of tiered rainwater detention rain gardens. So real sophisticated civil engineering approach to stormwater detention. And when we started off, we just sodded the whole thing because we knew that they were going to tear it all out. And they've slowly torn it out over the years. And it's this beautiful, wonderful, lush landscape. And they also have a similar situation to Silver Sage in that they were loaded with an alley along the back. And we were able to just load that alley with parking back there. And then the street frontage had a need to take up that grade. So we were like, 6-8 feet up off the street. So we designed these like beautiful planters and step systems to make it real gardeny and not brutal up there. And make the kind of porches that you did go out on and hang out. In co-housing, like especially this density, the private outdoor spaces are the street facing ones. That's where you go to get away from the community. You go out there, and that's where people like, smoke the cigarette they're not supposed to be smoking, or go to read quietly. Heartwood Commons is one in Tulsa, Oklahoma, And it's all single story, seniors, fourplexes and threeplexes, 6 acres and 36 units, and all designed to have passive solar access for the most part, and real cute cottagey kind of craftsman style architecture is really what appealed to those guys there. So hopefully you guys, one thing you see with our work is like, it doesn't all look the same. We're not like taking the same design and, you know, using it everywhere and saying, oh, you must want this. It really needs to grow out of you guys and out of the place. And one thing I think that's really important about all these projects and about co-housing design in general is you want to design a place that feels special. You know, you want to come home to it and be like, yeah, this is a cool thing that we did. You don't want it to be like, oh yeah, I just, you know, it's co-housing, but it, you know, feels like everything else that's been done. Like I'm just here at the Marriott. Great. Because I, at least where I'm at, like I haven't ran across any groups who've been super excited by what the multifamily builders are doing for spec homes. You know, like they're sort of like, ugh. So this is another one, Treehouse Village Eco-Housing up in Nova Scotia. It's coastal, Bridgewater, beautiful little old town, kind of the economic center of the region, of the South Shore region, not the sort of Halifax region. And we were able to do some like cool site analysis on this. And when we were walking the site initially, we, you know, now it's completely wooded, but up here on this part of the site, we were like, these are, the terrain is all weird and the trees are all the same age and they're all certain species. This has been clear cut and manipulated. We went back and we found historic photos that showed that that had actually been a gravel pit. And then this middle zone here had been clear cut a little further in the past. And the back zone over here had been, you know, almost like virgin forest. It was just big, beautiful, amazing, amazing trees. So we thought, well, okay, obviously we're going to cluster our homes on the old disturbed gravel pit, and you know, use our project to repair the site and create a totally amazing environment for children to be in and families. It's a real sweet project. It's Passive House certified. It's groundbreaking here right now. And so they should be moving in less than a year, hopefully. And real budget struggles, like right now with different building materials, it's a real challenge. We actually switched all of the buildings from being wood frame to being concrete. So they're gonna end up with like ICF, insulated concrete form exterior walls with 6 inches of foam on the outside of that. So these big fat concrete and foam walls with concrete and, you know, and insulated, you know, floor ceiling assemblies between the units. And so it's going to end up actually being, you know, really kind of like 500-year construction, because we don't have a lot of other choices up there right now. In March, Nova Scotia used up all of its wood allocation for 2021. So there's no wood. And working with this group, I mean, so I love, like, you guys are seeing like 3 or 4 images per picture, but like when I think about these projects, I think about all the humans, all the faces, all the workshops and all the hugs and all the tears and all the joy that came out of those processes. And it's just, you know, for me as an architect, like there's nothing better than going to a group like you guys, going through a workshop process, finding out what you care about, helping you guys draw connections between each other and come to decisions together. And then we do that, you know, then like the thing that you ask for, to the extent that it's possible, right? You can't ask for like a Maserati on a Volkswagen budget, but like, you know, and everybody has a Volkswagen budget anyways, right? So for the most part. CoHousing Houston is another one that we've got underway right now. It'll be breaking ground in about a month and a half. You know, it's Houston, Texas, man, those guys love their parking. So we have a parking lot over here that houses all the extra parking that they will need to turn into something else one day. When the revolution comes. And but we designed it so that like the green could just get wider and wider and wider and overtake the parking over time. That was a real clear strategy. And we wanted a good street frontage out here. So we did a good urban street frontage facing the existing neighborhood. And, you know, because we didn't want to have that sort of like Motel 6 feel on the inside, we staggered the stairs and did all kinds of really cool stuff with the railings and the balconies out here. So this is the matrix of this space is this like matrix of like occupiable, inhabitable, comfortable spaces. And the common house is this, you know, building over here with a giant roof deck, and it has the elevator. So like one of the things I talk about a lot in design is like co-housing design specifically is like choreography. Like, how do you anticipate and plan for how people live their lives day to day? You know, how do you create opportunities for casual social interaction where it doesn't feel forced, but it feels like, oh, cool, I ran into Alan, and that's great, as opposed to being like, oh, I got to go through there again. So the architecture of this really came out of like, you know, the group and the local architect, and the common green will look nothing like that. That's just like sort of where it was before we did the common green design workshop. So there'll be a bunch of trees and gardens in there. They really focused on, you know, low impact development. So like zero stormwater impact, keeping all the rainwater on site and having a real lush environment and doing things that are climate appropriate. So this is a good example. And Tulsa and Wild Sage and Silver Sage and some of the other ones rooted to resiliency during disasters has become super important. So in Tulsa, that's tornadoes. In Houston, that's hurricanes. In Nova Scotia, it was nor'easters that are icy. In rural Washington, it's, you know, big rains and deep winter. Truckee, it's like 12 feet of snow at once. In New Mexico, it's no water. So we have different strategies for all these different kinds of places. Wildfires too. We're also working in Bozeman Co-Housing with Eric and Mathilde, who used to work for Chuck Durrett. And they decided they wanted to work with us on this project. And we've been designing this thing with them. And that's going to be a great little project as well. We have a bunch of other projects going on. We are the sort of like main folks who want to totally pervert the idea of co-housing and do all kinds of weird stuff with it. So, you know, if we get a affordable housing project, we try to make it into a co-housing project. If we're hired to do work in South Africa and do, you know, post-apartheid agrarian, we're going to try to bring some like cool co-housing community ideas to that too. But in all these situations, like Ponderosa Mobile Home Park, which is that bottom left-hand image, that's a neighborhood that's got people in it. 68 homes are there now. It got flooded in the 2013 floods of Boulder. There's flood recovery money. So we went to them and said like, okay, so we want to not displace you guys. We're going to replace the infrastructure and roadways. You can keep your trailer as long as you want to, because that's what they said they wanted to do. We partnered with Habitat and we're creating a prefabrication company with them to prefab these buildings offsite and drop them in when one at a time when trailers go away. And so when people want to, they can opt out of their trailer, which has like $500 a month utility bills, and into a net zero passive house almost Habitat home with a 0% mortgage for the same amount of money. So that's pretty cool. And when we went to those folks, we just said like, okay, everybody, like, what do you want? And the Hispanic mom said like, we want to do Zumba. And I was like, I don't know what Zumba is, but we'll figure that out. Cool, Zumba. And then, you know, the dude said like, we like to work on cars together. I was like, well, would you like to do that not outside? And they're like, yeah, garage would be cool. And I was like, what if you had a lift in the garage and a place to store your tools? And they were like, oh my God, that's great. And so by just like listening to people and putting yourself out of the middle of it, you find out what they want, and then you can do that for them. And that tends to make them happier. So we're also doing a bunch of other co-housing communities, you know, Truckee, Denver, co-living project in Austin, a couple different pocket neighborhoods. So that's sort of like the end of my sort of spiel. And I'm happy to like go back through those slides and just talk about whatever you guys want to, but I'll stop the share here so you guys can see each other better, because that's important.
Well, thank you so much, Bryan.
Yeah.
That was great. Anybody, I think you're in control of your own mics and you can unmute yourselves and ask some questions. Guess we give Bryan a chance to have a sip of water.
Yeah. I mean, we don't have to drag this out either. If you guys are all done, it's cool. And I'm here to help. So if you guys, I mean, if you want to work with Caddis, that's cool. But if you just need to like talk about your project and like where you're going and like have, you know, the occasional shoulder to cry on or someone to help you talk things through, I'm happy to do that too. And I believe in co-housing, and it seems like it's a really good thing for people. And so, you know, talking to you guys is not a problem. Trying to help stimulate it.
I think I do have one question. I really appreciated when you talked about how your kids grew up and sort of their their perception of, I just run out of the house and there should be a bunch of friends there.
Yeah.
Do you have any kind of recommendations? So we're definitely still in the forming stage. And you can see there's some younger folks on this call, but we have a lot of older people that are interested in the co-housing thing. And we really want to have more of an intergenerational project. And, the idea would be to get some more people with families to be on these Zoom calls with us, like right now, to be, in this initial process. How do we, how do we attract people with families to the idea of co-housing?
A great question, and definitely one that's much discussed these days. When I started doing this work, it was all young families. It was all people who were about to have a baby or just had a baby, and they're like, the world is weird, and I don't want to raise my kid in it the way it is, and let's make a better place for my kid. And I think based on my friends and my experience, I think the parents are all too damn tired to do that right now. It's super stressful. During COVID, it was way worse, and so all the young families are looking to people who are retired to get after it and help us get these things to happen. So I think that's the way you should look at it, is like right now, like, okay, you won't have families in the beginning, but use families and use imagery of families and use intergenerational imagery in all of your outreach, on your website, in your flyers. That visual connection, use people of color, like you're trying to attract what you want to be when you grow up. So put that in there. I mean, some of that sounds a little jaded, right? But like that is an approach for how you present what you want to be, and you do want to be that. So it's okay to put that out there. That's the sort of like soft marketing piece of it. Another part of it is in the unit mix. How do we create the unit mix that's going to draw families? And I think there is a perception that families want 3, 4, 5 bedroom single family homes. I mostly see families moving into like 2 or 3 bedroom townhomes or 2 bedroom flats. I think like a 2 bedroom upstairs townhome with a bedroom or 2 in the basement is a great model. I don't know if you guys do basements that much where you're at, but that's what we found was the most successful unit type at Wild Sage. 18-foot wide, 36-foot deep townhome, straight stair, 2 bedrooms upstairs, 1 bathroom upstairs, kitchen, dining, living on the main floor, and an unfinished basement. So for us, that unfinished basement went from being storage to being carpeted and a big rompus room with like swings on the ceiling and stuff, to being like a TV space, to being having a bathroom and a bedroom. And now it has like it's basically like my teen son's whole world is where he spends all his time, is in this little room down there. So it adapts and changes nicely for people over time. So I think that's a great unit type. I think 3 bedroom units flats work real well for families. I'd say most families tend to want to be on the ground floor if they can make it work. But some families have said, no, I have a fear thing about being on the ground floor. I want to be on the upper floor. Found that in some of the Houston folks. I think so. That's like the unit mix is an interesting question. Like, how do you design a project that's going to appeal to families? And some of it's like putting stuff in there that like they like, like a little tot lot next to the common house patio, where families will be like, oh yeah, my kiddos can play there while I drink a glass of wine and talk to the grownups. The classic co-housing formula is like one parent playing with 10 kids and all the other parents sitting on the common patio, like drinking wine and being like, oh, thank God he's doing that. We can chat for a minute and like, okay, fine, it's my turn. I'll go do it for a little while. Parenting 1-to-1 with your kid is like too hard. You need like to gang up on them and rotate through. So site amenities and like the kind of site you pick is important. I think property search aspects can be important for this too, like what school district you're in, or are you near the cool Waldorf or Montessori school, or I definitely have seen, and you don't have land yet, right? Okay. Typically when you get land, you lose about half of your community. And that's just something to be aware of. And it's not like a bad thing. It's just simply because it gets real in a way that like helps clarify thinking. So I, as a young parent, might be like, oh yeah, I love this community. You guys are cool. The potlucks have been great, and I'm happy to do all these Zoom calls, and I've put in some money, and I love the workshops. It's really cool. And then like, oh, you bought land over on the north side or on the east side or over the across that bridge or past like, actually, my kids are still in this Montessori school for the next 5 years, and I don't want to drive over there. Or like the school district there is too bad, and I can't afford private school, so I need to go to the neighborhood that's got a good, tolerable public school. Like, so getting into the heads of like what people are experiencing and what they're looking for is really important. In terms of reaching them, you got to go where they are. You got to go to where the families are. And some of them are at Whole Foods and Vitamin Cottage and, things like that. Others are at Safeway and, whatever your versions of those things are. Schools, churches, daycares, moms groups on Facebook, email lists that are for like Boulder's got Boulder Rockin' Moms, and that's like a great place to spread information. Getting into the parent scene, I think, is really key. Shelley Parks is a professional who did the 500 Communities program with Katie, and she's a wealth of information on this stuff. And she's a real strategist on how to get families into your communities. I recommend working with her or hiring her for a chat or something. She's getting real results though, I'd say. So to me, like the design is super easy. Like we know what we're doing. I know how to do the workshops. Grace Kim knows how to do the workshops. Laura, you can pick from a few different architects who've done this a bunch of times, and or go it with a new person. My favorite way of working, honestly, is to because I don't want to be flying all over the place, and I want there to be more co-housing architects. So I always partner with a local architect and teach them everything I can, and then say like, okay, now you go do the next one. So Kathleen English is the architect we're working with in Houston, and she's going to be geared up to do the next co-housing project. She will have learned in the trenches about how to do it. Molly Jones in Tulsa, same thing. Megan and Raylene with RAD in Nova Scotia, same thing. Dan, whose last name just went out of my head, in Washington. Sorry, Dan, if you ever watch this video, I think highly of you, but I just forgot your last name. He's going to partner with us up there. So I think it's important to be spreading the knowledge base. But getting people who've done it before really helps you out. Hiring Katie is really useful. She's a great steward. And once you hire them, use them, exploit the hell out of them. So
I was on that one Coho USA thing. I remember Katie said something like, people hire me and then they don't even use me. So.
It's crazy. Like I'll get a phone call from a community and they'll be like, oh, we've got this big problem and we're really worried about it. I'm like, what did Katie say? And they're like, oh, we didn't call you. We didn't want to bother her. I'm like, bother her. Like, this is her job. Like, she likes to be bothered by this stuff and she's good at it. And if you call her right after, or Karen Gibney for facilitation or whoever, like if you call call somebody when it starts to rise up, and then you're going to handle it more skillfully. Maybe, I don't know, maybe we'll just screw it up, but ideally will be helpful.
Does anybody else have a question for Bryan? It's a good resource. Like you said, it's time to ask.
Even Jeff or JV, you guys who are newer to the scene, anybody who, you can ask, what the hell is co-housing and what am I doing on this phone call? It's totally okay. I've been a little bit jargony about the whole thing. So
Carol, do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. Do you ever do anything with garages? And if so, what does that look like, or what's the pros and cons of having actual garages?
Yeah, we typically, most of our projects, if I could, I would give every unit one garage for storage. That's me being a Boulderite. Like, everyone's got 7 bikes and 3 kayaks. Same for Truckee and Bozeman and Arlington, Washington. Everyone's like, well, I gotta put my tandem bike and my road bike and my mountain bike and my townie bike all in there. So I feel like for us, it's been a really important part of the storage piece of it, and people can park in there if they want to. I find that about when we really like test the market with these groups, like about a third to a half of the people in these groups are willing to buy a garage because they cost more money than not building it, right? So, and it usually is like $25,000 to $35,000 per garage to build it. And so if you want to buy a garage and you tell your group like we want garages, cool. We almost never do attached garages, and that's because we're trying to get you out of your car and into the common space. One of the things I'll like go into another little quick thing here on this stuff. Like I talked about the choreography of your days, right? And so like there's this nameless, faceless, horrible subdivision between Boulder and Denver called Rock Creek. And it's townhomes that are all garage facing the road with no yards. And there's like a little door and a garage for like a quarter mile. And so when you wake up in the morning, you have your coffee and you get in your car in your attached garage and you push the little button on the ceiling of your car and you zoom off and you don't see anybody. You have no opportunity to see anybody in your neighborhood. You go to work and maybe you have lunch with your friends and you come back home and before you get home, as you approach the landing, you push the button and it opens and and it closes behind you, make sure you don't see anybody else, right? And if you're trying to meet that neighbor, you got to like go bang on their door or like stand there and like wave at them as they, zoom by, which is never going to happen. Like, so nobody knows anybody over there. And if you're lucky enough to have kids, you release them into the 8-foot tall cedar fence pen behind the house where they're guaranteed to not see anybody. There's nothing to do there besides like play with the things that you've bought for them. There's no people back there. And, you contrast that with like my life. Like I wake up in the morning and I shout at my kids to get their shoes on to go to school, scooch them out the door, and then they hook up with the other dad or mom who's going to ride bikes with them all to school. This is when they were littler. And now they just walk up to the bus and go to school. So all the kids go off to school together and they all ride a bike with, dads. This is a big congregation. And I say, okay, bye, everybody, love you. Have a good day at school. And I turn around to go back inside and Karin says like, hey, Brian, have you had coffee yet? And I'm like, no, I haven't had any coffee yet. I'm dying for coffee. Kids are stupid. They didn't put their shoes on. Why am I a parent? This is terrible. And then I go in there and catch up with Karin for 5 minutes. I drink a cup of coffee and she's always got really good half and half. And I like that. And then I'm like, okay, I got to go to work. So I go to work and I come in here and I sit down at my computer and I check my email for 10 minutes. And I go, oh my God, this is overwhelming. There's too much going on. I need another coffee. So I grab a couple of people from the office and I walk through the neighborhood, which, you guys can see, it's this sweet gardeny environment behind me, right? So we walk through the gardened pathways of Holiday neighborhood and say hi to a couple of the neighbors, see people walking their dogs. And we go to the coffee shop and I run into 3 or 4 clients and other engineers and contractors we work with. I know the coffee shop people and I walk back down and we do that for lunch, sometimes in the afternoon. On the way home, I like walk through the community garden and eat all the strawberries and, get there before my wife does. So she doesn't know that we ever have any strawberries and she thinks they just never produce. And I'm like, well, I don't know what's happening to those. That's really weird. I get home and the kids are all outside playing. They've gotten home from school and they're running around doing their thing. And Nick says like, hey, Brian, have you had a beer yet? I'm like, no, I haven't had a beer. I sure would love to have a beer. That sounds great. I have a beer with Nick. And then somebody says, you know what? I got a whole bunch of weird greens from Cure Organic Farm. Why don't I fry those up? And does anybody have any protein? Like, oh yeah, somebody's just got like a couple of roasting hens that they got. So let's do those. And pretty soon there's a community meal happening. And I mean, that is all set up by the infrastructure and decision-making about how we design our towns and cities and neighborhoods, and like, I just don't understand how we are still failing to do this and understand it. But yeah, so that's a big embellishment, Carol, on your question. But it's sort of, I just want to make the point about like, it's not that garages are frowned upon in co-housing. It's more like attaching them is like, we try to avoid that.
I'm just curious about your, so your office is on the co-housing grounds or no?
Nope, I'm just like right across the street. I have basically a 150-foot commute.
Oh, I see. So
Yeah.
it just was located near enough to like a commercial center where you happen to also have your office. I get it. Okay.
Yeah. When we bought into Wild Sage, I bought this office condo. It was all really cheap back then. And we've had our office in this space for about 15 years.
Cool.
Yeah. Mixed use neighborhoods are really great. You know, like if you're going to partner with a developer, find a spot where you can like nestle into a mixed use neighborhood and then have that, you know, coffee shop and wine bar and, you know, sushi down the street and a place where you can have your offices. That's awesome. It's good living. You know, back when we started, like most co-housing groups were like, oh, we're back to the land. We're going to buy a 40-acre farm and cluster our housing there and do, you know, an island community style project. And that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. But like everyone I talked to for the past 5 or 10 years is like, how do I find small town village life? I want to not drive everywhere. I want to walk to the coffee shop. I want to sit in front of the coffee shop with my newspaper and have people walk by and be like, hey, Gerald, how's it going? What are you doing today? You know, it's good to see you. How's your knee? You know, like just the stuff that we do like as humans. Any other questions from you guys?
Can I ask real quickly, on that one slide, you had Arvada, Colorado was some project you're working on?
Yeah, Arvada, yeah.
Arvada. Because there's a co-housing group in Arvada, but it's not the one that you had on your list.
Nope, that's Geos. And it's a really interesting group. They've had a real interesting time of it. And they are, I don't know what their status is right now.
I kind of do. They're kind of stuck. They couldn't buy the land, and now they're kind of regrouping. It was the kind of what you said, like somehow the land fell through, and then half the people left, and they're kind of trying to rebuild. But so there's another co-housing group though that's in Arvada that's trying.
It's actually it's an interesting thing. It's a couple civil engineers who bought this piece of property and they're doing a development on it, and they wanted to use co-housing ideas and pocket neighborhood ideas to develop it, because all the stuff they had done was not that great, you know, and they wanted to do something really cool and better. So they're in the process of doing that right now, kind of from a developer led perspective. I wouldn't be surprised if some of the Arvada folks hooked up with them eventually. I've been really close with that Arvada group for a long time, and you know, there's been a lot of like, maybe they were going to hire me, maybe they're not. I'm real good friends with the architect for Geos, Michael Tavel, and Norbert Klebel, who was the developer behind it. So I know all these people, and it's sort of like, you know, on the edge of it. And the plan was for me to do all the workshops with Michael, teach him what I know, with Jim Leach and Norbert, and the group's real strong. You know, internal things happened with the developer that put the land up for grabs. The whole property got bought. The group couldn't hang on to that piece of it. So, and I tried really hard to find him a developer. I talked to UDP, I talked to everybody I could talk to around here, and nobody wanted to jump in and take it on. So, didn't happen, which is sad because those folks have put a lot of years into this thing.
Okay, well, I was just curious about that. Okay, so it is two different projects. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, does anybody else have any questions? Otherwise, I don't want to cut it off, but it's been an hour. Jeff?
I got a rudimentary question for someone just learning about these things.
Yeah.
What would you say is the average square footage in terms of, you know, the private residences?
Yeah, it really varies. I'd say we've gotten down to, you know, kind of efficiency 1-bedrooms, like, or studio apartments that are like 300 or 400 square feet, real small. Usually 1-bedrooms run more like 650, 750. 2-bedrooms are typically 850 to 900 if they have 1 bath. If they have 2 baths, they go to like 950, maybe 1,000. And there's usually 2 kinds of 2-bedroom units. There's like the least expensive possible 2-bedroom unit, 1 bath. And then there's like a nicer 2-bedroom unit that has 2 baths and a little more space, commonly in co-housing. And then, you know, 3 or 4 bedrooms, they range up from there. When I'm doing like the quick mental math on a project, I'll say like, oh, 36 units, 1,000 square feet a piece, 36,000 square feet. But that's just me being a lazy math guy.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Joel, you've been very quiet. Do you have a question?
No, I don't have a question.
Yeah, cool. Right on.
All right.
Thank you guys all for coming. It's really cool.
Well, thank you very much for your time. Like I said, we will
Yeah.
put the recording up on our website, and I have a feeling that I'll be calling Bryan with more questions.
The door's always open.
a
Happy to hear from you,
font of
Julie.
Information. Thank you. Have a great evening, everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys and good luck. I hope it works really well for you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.